This is one of Airbus's star planes, apparently just like a civilian plane, but it actually hides many secrets. Why does Boeing never compare itself to Airbus, but Airbus does compare itself to Boeing? Why does any military person think that airplane bathrooms are a first world luxury? Or what are the two main types of missions carried out by the Airbus A330 multi-role tanker transport escorted by fighter jets? Is that what you're about to discover? The military power of the United States around the world is impressive. They have the ability to mobilize fighter jets to the furthest corner of the planet. Many believe this is due to the large number of military bases spread across the 5 continents. And yes, that's true, but equally important is their numerous fleet of in-flight refueling aircraft. These are the planes that serve to refuel other planes in the air, and in this way, make them able to fly without distance limitations. To give you an idea, around 10% of the aircraft in the United States Air Force are tanker planes. In-flight refueling has been used since the Korean War, and more countries are interested in having this capability. For this reason, Airbus, one of the aerospace giants, saw a good market in these platforms. In the early 1900s, they developed an Airbus A310 prototype capable of in-flight refueling. But in addition to this, the plane could be used for transport and other types of missions. That's when the concept of multi-role tanker transport was born, which stands for multi-role tanker transport. Over the years, Airbus realized that they could use another one of their planes for this task, the A330. And this decision was one of the best the company has ever made in its entire history. Because it seems like the A330 was a plane designed to later become a multi-role tanker transport. It's the perfect plane. In mid-June of 2023, Airbus invited me to the Le Bourget Air Show in Paris. The plan was to privately show me some of their planes, including the A330 multi-role tanker transport. I can proudly say that this plane is made in my city, south of Madrid, although this is not entirely true. When a country places an order for this plane, production begins in the different countries that are part of Airbus. The horizontal stabilizers are made in Madrid, the wings are made in the United Kingdom, and so on with all the other parts of the plane. When all of them are ready, they are taken to Toulouse in France, and the assembly of the Airbus A330 begins. Curiously, an A330 is built in Toulouse of commercial passengers, exactly the same one that they would sell to an airline. And when the process ends, this plane is flown to Madrid, where the entire interior of the plane is dismantled and the systems are installed to convert it into a multi-role tanker transport. Given the various military specifications requested, it's possible to order the plane with minor variations. You might be wondering why this plane isn't made from the start in Toulouse, already being a military plane. Well, because the Toulouse factory is optimized for making commercial planes. Adding a military plane would significantly alter and reduce the efficiency of the process. That's why it's best to make a commercial plane and then have all the conversion done in Madrid. After that day in Paris, I became quite interested in this plane, as I found its capabilities fascinating. And that's why a few months later, Airbus has invited me to their facilities in Getafe, where this conversion is done. So I saw the disassembled planes. The A330 multi-role tanker transport's interior is generally identical to a passenger A330. But, for example, the one I was able to be in Paris had no seats, because that was going to be delivered to France. And some of the planes that France uses are to be flying hospitals, so they were going to install the stretchers. But here, for example, I'm inside another A330 multi-role tanker transport, and as you can see, it's exactly the same as a passenger plane. Inside the A330 multi-role tanker transport, which as you can see inside is, well, the top part is exactly the same as a civilian plane. But they also have business class. This depends on the country. It's possible that they say they want all the seats to be business class, or that they want none in business class. But specifically, this one was very similar to anyone you could fly on. Normally, tanker planes use part of the interior fuselage space to carry extra fuel. But the A330 is capable of carrying out all the necessary missions of a tanker plane with the fuel tanks of the wings and tail. This means that this plane allows all the available space of the upper part of the fuselage and the lower part of the hold to be used. Do you understand multi-role tanker transport now? Because you can act as a cargo plane in case you want to carry material, or as a troop transport plane in case you need to mobilize a lot of people, or else as a tanker plane, and all those functions without changing its configuration. And now the point has come to compare this plane with the competition. The Boeing KC-46 is a plane designed based on the older Boeing 767. Well, what you need to know is that the KC-46 uses the lower part of the fuselage to carry some extra fuel tanks. Thus, that space can't be used. So the transport of cargo and personnel must be done on the top, so it won't be able to carry a lot of people or a lot of cargo. Although it is true that the plane can be reconfigured in a few hours to carry more cargo, reducing the personnel space or vice versa. Well, even so, even carrying the fuel tanks in the lower part of the fuselage, the KC-46 can carry approximately 15% less fuel than the A330 multi-role tanker transport. There are two techniques for in-flight refueling, and the A330 multi-role tanker transport is prepared to perform both. The first one is the probe and drogue, which consists of the tanker aircraft extending a drogue that stays flying backwards. And the aircraft that is going to refuel should extend a kind of arm that could be put inside this drogue. Once contact is made, the transfer of fuel could begin. The other method is through the boom, a system manageable from the tanker aircraft. In my first video about this series of in-flight refueling, both are explained in detail. The A330 and the A340 share many similarities. One of them is the use of the same wings. The A340 uses 4 engines, while the A330 only uses 2. What they do is take advantage of that point where the outer engine would go and place the pods for the baskets. In this way, they ensure that this part of the structure is prepared to support a lot of weight. And thanks to this, they have saved a lot of time and money on possible redesigns. And now we get to the interesting part, the topic of the missions. When deploying several fighter planes, it is normal for the fighters to be flying. The A330 multi-role tanker transport would carry the team of mechanics and other essential personnel in formation. In the compartments would go the luggage of the entire squadron and also the extra load that was being transported. It could go in the lower part. Note that when I say compartments, I'm referring to the overhead bins where you store your luggage, which the A330 multi-role tanker transport does have. By flying in parallel, the fighter planes could refuel from the A330 multi-role tanker transport as needed, allowing them to arrive at the destination simultaneously. The normal thing would be for each tanker plane to carry 4 fighters on the side and supply them with fuel, assuming they also carry a load of 25,000 kilos. Together they could reach a distance of 124 miles. This distance is ideal for crossing the Atlantic with minimal assistance from a tanker plane. Fighter planes can reach up to about 3,000 kilometers away, so they couldn't cross the Atlantic on their own. Another type of mission these planes carry out is to leave from their airport, go up to a certain distance, and stay flying in the area to refuel some fighter planes that are on missions. This, for example, was very typical in the First Gulf War. The tanker planes would stay flying over Saudi Arabia, while the fighters went to Iraq, did their mission, returned to Arabia to refuel when they had full fuel tanks. They could return to Iraq to continue their mission and similar ones, assuming the tanker plane flew about 0 miles to reach the refueling area. Then it could be in the area for 5 hours, refueling other fighters before returning to its airport. In these 5 hours, it could have supplied fuel to 26 F-16, 114 F-15E, 17 Eurofighters, or 18 Rafales. When the fighter planes go to refuel, they fly in formation with the tanker plane, and this is the leader of the formation.
The tanker plane is usually the one that leads, and it has to take them along the route or keep them within the area. It carries all communications with ground control.
The fighter planes communicate with the A330 pilot, but when they are going to refuel, they switch to communicate with the refueling operator, so the tanker plane must carry them along the appropriate route. If we look at the cockpit, it's exactly identical to the civilian version. The big difference is that behind the pilots is the boom, the air refueling officer who is in charge of the entire refueling process. We can see that there are 2 positions. This is because there can be 2 operators to reduce the workload. That is, one is working while the other is taking a break, etc. Or also so that students can perform their first tasks under supervision. While in Getafe, I spoke with Juan Cabrera, an air-to-air refueling operator. I asked if the pilot and boom operator were distracted while communicating on the radio during operation since they shared the same compartment. But he told me no, quite the opposite.
There is actually better coordination. The advantage you have of being in the booth is that there is much more information. There can be a non-verbal language of turning the head and seeing what the pilot is doing. The pilot can turn his head and see what you are doing, so there can be fewer situations. Interruption.
In order for the boom operator to be able to perform all these areas from the cabin, a very advanced system of cameras and sensors had to be created that allows the mission to be carried out from the front of the plane. In the past, this operation was performed by an operator who was physically lying in the back of the plane. One of the essential things today is the use of 3D glasses to have a three-dimensional vision. In this way, you can see how the boom extends or retracts, and this is the reason why there are so many. They have
a total of 7 cameras. These are inspection cameras. Have pan and tilt. You can orient it, and it has zoom functionality. These cameras are mainly used for operation with the pods. The POD deploys a hose with a basket at one end, and with these cameras, it allows you to see from the POD's exit to the basket. These are the other cameras that the ends are for the boom, because these are cameras that give a three-dimensional image. And the one in the middle and the sides give a complete panoramic image, okay? The panoramas are used for both pod and boom because you see from tip to tip, the wing tip, and from behind.
That is, these two cameras are used for the probe and drogue system and are the ones that give us this view. These other two are the ones used in the boom, which point in the same direction, because the goal is to provide a three-dimensional view, and the others are for getting a panoramic view to be able to see around the plane. In addition to this, the plane has a light system on its belly that tells the pilot where to move while refueling. During my visit to Getafe, a plane happened to have these lights partially disassembled, which is not typically visible in photos. You can see on the left ones that there is a D for down and a U for up. On the right ones, there is an F for forward and an A for after. With these indications, it is instructed to go up, down, back, and forward. And in this way, the refueling plane would know where it would need to move without the need to use the radios. But, of course, you might ask, why wouldn't they want to use the radios? Well, to detect a fighter plane, people think that the only method is the traditional one of detecting it by radar, but the reality is that today there are many other ways. One of them is to use systems that study the electromagnetic spectrum. Even if your plane hasn't been detected, your communications may have been alerting the enemy to a hostile aircraft in the vicinity. For this reason, the A330 multi-role tanker transport can perform in-flight refueling without the need to use radios. In Europe, all fighter planes perform in-flight refueling using the probe and drogue system. Well, except for the A330 multi-role tanker transport, which interestingly receives fuel through the boom system. This is because the amount of fuel provided through this system is 3 times greater than what is received through the probe and drogue system. The Airbus A330 multi-role tanker transport will also be sold to non-European countries. Some European countries have bought American fighters, necessitating their ability to operate with the probe and drogue system, and also with the boom. In short, having more refueling capable planes is ideal. That's why I practiced on a simulator. Refueling a B-1 Lancer. Okay, so we're here to test the in-flight refueling with the B-1. Let's see how it goes. A plane that only the United States has and no one else is going to have, but on long missions where you would want to reach isolated places. Is it possible that the United States asked for the support of a tanker plane from an allied country to be able to carry out in-flight refueling? It is also important to ensure that refueling can be done with all United States planes, to leave the door open for the North American giant to acquire these planes. Finally, let me give one last advantage of the A330 over any other similar plane on the market. As a plane based on a civilian aircraft, it provides comfortable travel for its passengers. Notice the numerous seats available. Compare that to going on folding chairs. Not to mention having a galley where you can heat up food, make a coffee, or things like that. Plus, there's the matter of the bathroom. It's the same as a civilian plane, which yes, you normally complain about how the bathroom of a plane is when you travel, but military planes usually have latrines. And on top of all this, the A330 has beds where the pilots can lie down to rest if needed. If they are doing shift flights or similar, this may seem nonsensical, but when flying daily, I assure you it's not. One last thing, notice how Airbus always compares their plane with the competition, the KC-46, while Boeing always compares the KC-46 with the old tanker planes. I think that says it all. Thank you all.